Hello, it's Reija and welcome to another video. Today I am going to do my April reading wrap-up, which is also my O.W.L.s wrap-up for the magical readathon. I hope you will enjoy. Now, my goal for the magical readathon and my O.W.L.s was to finish 9 books to get an outstanding. But I finished with 6, and I'm actually quite proud of that because during the last 2 weeks, so half of the readathon, I was very busy with school and such. So the fact that I could still push through and read 6 things is amazing. So without further ado, let's get started with the books. The first one that I finished was for herbology, and that was Aquicorn Cove by Katie O'Neill. I really liked this one. It is very cozy, very colorful, and the story is quite simplistic. This is a middle grade graphic novel that deals with grief and nature and conservation of nature and climate change. And it is told in such a way that I would imagine that these topics would be easy for parents to start discussing with their children. There is queer romance with a woman and a non-binary character, and there is also like people of color as main characters. There is like various different body types in these characters, and it is just a very well-rounded story visually, and the way it is told is that these people just are. There is like no attention drawn to what makes them different. They are allowed to be fully realized characters that have their own motives and have their own dislikes and likes and their own ways to approach the world. And the things that make them different are not the things that mark them, you know? I find that that is a very good way to introduce different kinds of people to children, is that just show that they are people. Like, these are people like you and me, and it's perfectly fine, it's valid, and you don't need to constantly draw attention to the differences, because in the end we are the same, we just have different experiences and different approaches to life and such. And it is a beautiful story. The art is amazing. I just love Katie O'Neill's way of illustrating. It is so soft. She doesn't use line art most of the time, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful story. I gave Aquicorn Cove 4 stars. The next book I finished was for Transfiguration, and that was Wundersmith, The Calling of Morrigan Crow by Jessica Townsend. And for me, I personally like this a lot better than Nevermore, which I also liked. I think that in Wundersmith the story really breaks free from the comparisons to Harry Potter. It is a lot darker. It deals with concepts such as people assuming that because you have a certain ability and you have certain power means that you are automatically going to use them to ill will. And it is about breaking away from that kind of destiny and breaking away from the assumptions that people are pushing on you. And I think that it was a very powerful read. I love Morrigan's character. I love that she still has that trauma and that baggage of being called a cursed child, and that is still following her. She's still very unsure, and she's still suffering with imposter syndrome and anxiety about whether people actually like her. I found that to be really relatable. And I also think that it is a good thorough line through the books that she is trying to deal with that and trying to find ways to cope with it and to find her own voice and her own way of doing things. And yeah, I think that this was a very wonderful read. There were a couple of instances where I was like, okay, this wasn't as well foreshadowed and told as I would have liked. The main villain in this book is a bit thin, and I could have used some more time to establish them as the, villain and give them some sort of like actual backstory and such. But other than that, I really like this, and I gave Wundersmith The Calling of Morrigan Crow 4 stars as well. Next book I read was for Charms, and that was to read an adult book, and I read The Captive Prince by C.S. Pacat. This is the first in the Captive Prince trilogy. And I have heard that people either really despise this series or that they really love it. And I think that I fall kind of into the middle with this. I could see some things that were really interesting, like the whole dynamic between Laurent and Damon. I like that sort of dynamic between like a romance, like that sort of cold and aloof character versus a hot-headed, like, not brute, but a hot-headed, like, aggressor. Like, I like those types of dynamics in, like, relationships, in fiction, not in real life necessarily. But I also felt that this book maybe focused too much on the sexual exploits and the sexual nature of the story instead of focusing on the characterization and world building. I think that this would have been a lot stronger if it kind of ditched the whole sexual tomfoolery for the most part, or at least like reduced. This book was originally published in LiveJournal, and that really shows. There are like chapter breaks that really make you think that, okay, this is where this was posted as a LiveJournal post, and then the next post kind of recaps the previous paragraph, which kind of felt a little bit redundant because there were like overuse of similar sentences, like a chapter would end in a sentence and then start with the same sentence in the next chapter, and that was kind of redundant and kind of pulled me out of the story a bit. So that could have used a little bit of editing when it was published as a book, because I understand how that works in publishing it online, but as I'm reading it in physical form, it was really noticeable. I also think that Damon and Laurent are basically the same characters from start to finish. There was no thorough line of character development. But on the other hand, I still read it, I finished it, I didn't see problems with it. Like, aside from the ones I mentioned, I don't think it was... I don't think this was, like, something to write home about. I don't think this is something to get really angry about. For me, this first one reads very much like your typical BL boys love manga. I hear that C.S. Pacat actually really develops these characters through books 2 and 3, so I am interested in reading them and seeing how this story actually develops. But, I just thought that this first one was mildly okay. Nothing, like, super exciting. I actually think that this reminds me a lot about Aino Kusabi, which is a science fiction erotica novel with a very similar premise as this. And I would be very surprised if C.S. Pacat hadn't read it or hadn't watched the anime. But yeah, I gave Captive Prince 2.5 stars. It was okay. Like, I guess I read it. And the next one I read was for arithmancy, and that was to read a book with that was co-authored by 2 authors. And I read the 8th volume of The Promised Neverland by Kaiu Shirai and Pozuka Demisu, and I loved it. The last volume was very much a setup for this arc, and this volume really brought it together. It introduced new characters, it was really action-packed, there was also a lot of world-building details, so it was all around very fast-paced, very well drawn, and like there is a possibility of character development for some of the side characters that are introduced that I'm really looking forward to. And I gave this volume 5 stars. Like, I can't talk about it too much because it is the 8th volume, but I continue to really love this freaking series. I read Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb. Now, some of you who have been here for a longer time might remember that I was kind of / mildly enthusiastic about the first one in the Farseer trilogy. Some problems with it, but overall sort of enjoyed it. This book is where I fell in love with the realm of the Elderlings, and I was so invested in all of the characters. I think a lot of the characters in this book may now be called my favorite characters. Ketriken, Burich, Patience, they are in the Hall of Fame of favorite characters. I really got a lot more invested in Fitz and the Fool, and this book was just wonderful. It is a direct continuation from the first one, and there is this thorough line of frustration with how powerless these characters are in the face of some struggles that they are trying to overcome. With the character of Regal trying to usurp the throne, but people not having evidence that he's actually doing it, and also the whole Red Ship raiders and how they are powerless against them. You feel the character's frustration, you feel that feeling of powerlessness, that you want to do something, you want to help, but you can't. And that is a constant in this book, and sometimes it is super frustrating and annoying, and you're like, I just want something to happen right now, I just want someone to pay for these shitty things that are happening. But at the same time, it is super realistic that people with less power and less access to privilege and less access to means to actually get shit done can't. You know, they can't do these things. And I really loved it. There were some really high stakes. The ending was bonkers, and I really want to get into Assassin's Quest right now. And yeah, I loved it. A few pacing issues, but those were kind of minor. I gave Royal Assassin 4.5 stars, and I'm really, really looking forward to reading the next one. And the very last thing that I read during the O.W.L.s readathon was Wotakoi Volume 2. I used this book for my potions exam, which was to read a sequel. And I really enjoyed Wotakoi. It's still not like the best of the best or anything, but I like reading about adult characters who are in the workforce and who have to deal with adult stuff, you know. And I just like that this series explores different kinds of relationship dynamics. We have 3 pairings who are all vastly different from each other. They are all sort of kind of nerds in different ways. And this just follows their nerdy exploits and also their romance troubles, and I just find it highly enjoyable. Like, it's not perfect, there are some goofy things. This volume in particular had a lot of like misspellings and typos and stuff that pulled me out of it. But all in all, it's an enjoyable read. Like, nothing super fantastic, but I'm enjoying it. The art is fantastic, and you know, this is one of those series that just makes me happy. Like, I'm feeling giddy and excited when I read it, and it is kind of like bubblegum. It tastes amazing at first, and then it kind of loses its taste and just kind of blends in. And this is kind of like that. I'm having fun when I'm reading it, but I don't necessarily like think about it a lot afterwards. And that's fine. I gave this one 3.5 stars. And there you have it. Those were all the books that I read for my owls. I didn't manage to get enough for my Metal Charmer degree, but I will have to pick out another career in order to get my newts going in August. But I am still quite happy to have finished with 6 owls. If you participated in the Owls Readathon, how did you do? How many owls did you manage to finish? If you have read any of the same books as I did, what were your thoughts on them? I would very much like to know. And I will see you in another video very soon. Bye bye!